welcome. This talk is sponsored by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication at the Yale School of the Environment. The Yale Center for Environmental Communication, or YCEC for short, focuses on four areas. First, we conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behavior. Second, we teach students and train working professionals. Third, we convene a global network of climate communication scholars and practitioners. And finally, we inform and engage the public through environmental journalism, including Yale Climate Connections, a climate-focused news service that engages many thousands of people every day and includes a short daily radio story that airs on 752 stations nationwide. Since cutting methane pollution is the fastest opportunity we have to immediately slow the rate of global warming, the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication studies the issue and is working with partners on it. We investigated how Republicans and Democrats respond to the terms natural gas, methane, and methane gas. We found that both Democrats and Republicans had the most positive feelings about natural gas and most negative feelings about methane and methane gas. And in collaboration with Rewiring America, we researched preferences between appliances powered by electricity and fossil fuels. More on this shortly. If you are an organization looking for support in your communications on this topic, please reach out to our partnerships team at ypccc.partners@yale.edu, and we'll put that email address in our follow-up email to you, so don't worry about writing it down. As far as logistics, the chat is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to send us your questions, and also vote for your favorite questions so they rise to the top, and we'll try and get to those ones. We will make a recording of this conversation available on our website, and we'll also send a link to the recording to everyone who registered. Today's talk will be moderated by Joshua Lowe. Joshua leads the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications strategy for engaging and supporting the climate and clean energy advocacy, media, and education communities. Prior to YPCCC, he managed campaigns and led grasstops and grassroots organizations' efforts for climate action, elected climate champions, and passed legislation that expanded clean energy access in multiple states. Joshua?
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Joshua Lowe. As Eric was saying, I am really a community organizer by training. I got my start in Memphis, Tennessee, working to clean up toxic pollution in an environmental justice community that I was living in. I'm so excited today to talk to you about methane pollution, and we have a great set of speakers. But first, I want to set some context. So why are we talking about methane pollution? Well, methane pollution traps 80 times more heat than carbon pollution. If we think about this in the heat trapping blanket, that's like 80 heat trapping blankets or a really, really, really warm down blanket. So if we can cut methane pollution, we can take really major steps forward with addressing the climate crisis. Methane pollution comes from a variety of sources. The largest source globally is agriculture, followed by the energy sector, including the oil, gas, and bioenergy sector, and the waste sector. And the good news is that people from around the world are working on solutions with a variety of theories of change. People are electrifying their homes, joining grassroots organizations, advocating with policymakers, and more. We even have organizations like Environmental Defense Fund launching satellites into space to help address this problem. And a growing number of people are working on this issue from a variety of theories of change. So why am I saying methane pollution? Well, in August 2020, we released a study of a message experiment, and we showed that the American public perceives natural gas much more favorably than other fossil fuels like oil and coal. And they believe that natural gas is much less harmful to human health than coal or oil. But we know that methane pollution is a huge problem and hurts human health. So that's why I'm saying methane pollution. I also want to highlight the Global Methane Hub survey that came out earlier this year. They surveyed 17 countries, and there was an overwhelming belief in climate change. There was also strong support for addressing methane pollution. And we'll make sure to drop the link into the follow-up email so you can dive into those results on a country by country basis. The last thing I want to highlight is just the importance of investing in strategic communications. In 2023, we saw an important example why this is. So the Olaf Scholz's uh, or sh yeah, Olaf Scholz's government wanted to be a pioneer in climate protection. They advanced heat pump legislation that was really great, except that the climate movement there didn't bring people along. And that has meant that his government has really paid a high political price. And so it's critical as we work on these issues that we build public support and political will for climate action to cut methane pollution. So we're going to have three speakers today that are going to highlight three different efforts to cut methane pollution. Again, we need a variety of strategies to address this both in the United States and globally. So our first speaker is going to be Phoebe Sweet. She's the president of Acadia Strategies, a climate communications consulting firm. Her political career began on Senator Majority Leader Harry Reid's 2010 election campaign, and she later joined the Majority Leader in Washington as his speechwriter and communications advisor. Our second speaker is going to be Sarah Lazarovic of Rewiring America, and she's going to talk about how their research and communication work is working to address and change consumer behavior to electrify everything. She's the Vice President of Communications and Creative Strategy at Rewiring America, and is an artist, writer, creative director, and marketing strategist. She's worked in past roles to increase public support for carbon pricing and stronger climate policy. Our last speaker is going to be Sonal Jessel. She's going to share an amazing case study about how We Act, an environmental justice organization in New York City, won their campaign to move renters off gas in public housing. She's a former director of policy at We Act for environmental justice, and she works with local, city, state leaders to advance policy changes that improve environmental health and advances the just transition. So looking forward to today's conversation. And with that, Phoebe, take it away.
Thank you, Josh. Just gonna share my screen here. Okay. And I'm gonna minimize you beautiful people. So thanks for the intro, Josh, and to Yale for hosting the conversation today. So I've been working on methane issues and in particular, communicating the urgency of the climate threat posed by increasing levels of methane in the atmosphere for about 5 years now. But my roots with this problem actually go back almost 20 years to when I was an environmental reporter writing about the fight to stop the last proposed coal plants in the United States. At the time, even the climate community viewed so-called natural gas, which is, as Josh said, mostly made up of methane, as part of the climate solution and better than coal for our environment. Today, we know better. While gas emits less CO2 and some other co-pollutants when it's burned to create power, the latest science shows methane may in fact be worse for our planet than coal overall, and hat tip to RMI for the fun graphic that explains why. Methane, as Josh said, is a super pollutant 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide for heating the planet in the short term, and it leaks into the atmosphere at every point along the supply chain. It leaks or is intentionally vented at wellheads where gas is extracted from the ground, from pipelines that snake across the country to power plants and industrial facilities, at the coastal export terminals where it's super cold to be shipped around the world, and of course from the pipes under city streets everywhere, as well as from our very own stoves. These emissions are a powerful driver of climate change that will push us past 1.5 degrees if we don't act quickly to identify and mitigate them, to halt the expansion of gas infrastructure, and to phase out use of polluting methane from our energy sector altogether. So some of you might be asking, what about the cows? I know they're a hot topic, and in fact, agriculture and waste, including landfills, are also a big source of methane. I know many of you are interested in those challenges, but today I'm going to focus on the energy sector. And as you can see from this slide from S&P Global, the energy sector contributes about 37% of US methane emissions between gas and coal together. However, several studies have found that the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the source for this data, actually underestimates the amount of methane leaking from US oil and gas operations by as much as half. These numbers also look different in other parts of the world, but this gives you a sense of where the methane emissions challenge is coming from in the US. Fortunately, we already have many of the solutions we need to transition the energy sector away from oil and gas. In fact, many renewables are already cheaper than building new gas power, and the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure laws have injected hundreds of billions of dollars into accelerating and scaling these solutions. So what's standing in our way? Well, politics for one thing, and public perception for another. About 72% of Americans have a very or somewhat favorable opinion of gas. Natural gas specifically, and that's down from 77% a few years ago, but it's still a really big challenge. And huge thanks to my friends at Climate Nexus for the incredible tracking data they've collected in cooperation with Yale over the last 5 years on this topic. By comparison, from that same survey from July of 2023, we found that solar had 83% favorables and wind had 74% favorables. So natural gas is nearly as beloved as renewables. And you can compare that to oil at 47% and coal at 35%. But when we look at methane, we see another picture entirely. Only 27% of Americans in the same survey said that they had a very or somewhat favorable view of methane gas. Asked if they think natural gas is clean, 56% of Americans said yes. Only 23% said the same about methane gas. So how can that be when natural gas and methane are basically the same thing? In a word, branding. You are probably all familiar with the blue flame. It is the symbol of the natural gas industry. And thanks to a century of branding natural gas as clean and safe, and even a couple of decades of branding it as part of the climate solution, Americans overwhelmingly have a favorable opinion of gas. This didn't happen by accident. The gas industry relies on an incredibly well-funded propaganda machine to sell this image. And the words we use matter. The fossil fuel industry has invested heavily in making sure the public uses specific terminology to describe its polluting products, especially natural gas. When you think about it, gas stoves and furnaces are basically tiny power plants that are in your basement or your kitchen. There aren't many people who would want to live next door to a power plant or a refinery. So why do most Americans think nothing of firing up the gas stove to cook their eggs each morning? The reality is, in addition to the slick advertising of the blue flame, most people just don't know that natural gas is methane. When asked a multiple choice question, which of the following energy sources is mostly made of methane, coal, natural gas, nuclear energy, or oil, less than half of people picked the right answer, and another third weren't sure. But that's actually progress. A few years ago, only a third of people got the answer right. So methane literacy is on the rise. Still, the industry has done a really good job of burying decades of scientific research showing the dangers of burning gas indoors. In the 60s, the gas industry launched an advertising campaign called Operation Attack after concerns about indoor air pollution from gas stoves became public. And yet 60 years later, it was still considered controversial when a Consumer Product Safety Commissioner said last year that the federal government could consider new regulations on this common household appliance. That's despite new research showing gas stoves emit as much benzene, a cancer-causing pollutant, as secondhand smoke. So what can we do about it? For starters, never say natural. We encourage advocates and journalists to call the gas we burn in power plants and stoves what it really is, methane gas. Rather than trying to obscure the nature of the product, we should simply stick with the science. Of course, we know lifting the veil of the blue flame does impact the favorability of gas. When we tell people that natural gas is mostly made of methane and that it's also referred to as methane gas, favorability sank to 39%, down from 72% that I referenced earlier. So it's no wonder the industry is nervous about these numbers, and they're fighting back with more PR and advertising. In January, the natural gas and oil industry, as they call themselves now, launched an 8-figure campaign to burnish their image with American voters. You can see it here on the screen, Lights on Energy. They pay builders to install gas appliances in new homes, and they fund front groups that operate in cities and towns across America meant to look like grassroots advocates, but who actually have links to the American Gas Association. And as their allies in the PR industry did with the facts of climate change, and for the tobacco industry before that, they sow doubt about the science that very clearly shows, first, gas is a climate problem rather than a climate solution. And second, gas is dangerous and unhealthy, whether we're burning it in our homes or living near fracking or methane processing facilities. Okay, so that's all pretty heavy. I'm going to give you a little palate cleanser now. The challenge of shifting public awareness and perception on this common energy source is it's a high hill to climb. And the science itself is sobering, both from a health and a climate perspective. But educating the public about methane gas doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be scary. And advocates are increasingly turning to creative storytelling and even comedy to raise awareness about this problem. So I'm going to share a couple of examples in the follow-up email, but here on the screen, you can see the promo from a new campaign from my friends at the Gas Leaks Project, which is raising awareness about the health and climate impacts of gas. It's called Hot and Toxic. It's the largest ever effort to educate consumers about the harms of methane gas. And it's a reality show parody that amplifies the blockbuster 2022 study from Harvard University that showed samples of gas from Boston area homes contained 21 hazardous air pollutants, including benzene. And as you'll see, it really brings these toxins to life. As I said, I'll share this link and some others after the presentation, but for now, enjoy, and then I'll turn it directly over to Sarah.
Let's get lit.
Welcome to Hot and Toxic, the show where a new homeowner had no idea her natural gas hookup would invite 21 toxic housemates into her home.
What up, I'm Ben. Benzene.
I'm nitrogen dioxide, but you can call me Di because this body is to die for.
I'm carbon monoxide, but you can call me Themo, as in Themo, life-threatening health problems.
Wait, what is this show even about?
It's Hot and Toxic, the toxic reality of natural gas, now airing in your home.
Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody for having me. Apologies for my inability to use Zoom after 4 years of pandemic. I'm Sarah from Rewiring America, and our mission is to electrify everything for everyone. And to do that, we have to get rid of all the gas. To give you a quick rewind, in case you're unfamiliar with our core thesis, I'm going to start with my own methane moment. It was a climate aha moment that brought me over to this world. I was working on climate, but focused on stuff like recycling and consumerism, all well and good. But I had somehow bought the line that natural gas was natural because I just didn't focus on that area of climate. And I got a gas stove installed in 2014. Even though I'd already been working in climate and was deeply immersed in this stuff, I just didn't think about those parts of it and was focused very much in other domains. Later came around to learning much more about the things in my house that were actually really contributing to the climate crisis and understanding the planet harming health of methane and CO2. This is hugely important work because fully 42% of energy-related emissions come from our home, the cars we drive, how we heat our homes, cook our food, and dry our clothes. And lots of people, like myself, just a short while ago, just did not know and do not know about this huge power they have and how incredible it is to get these things out of their homes. And when we tell them this huge electric light bulb goes off, methane is just not this far away gas, it's a gas that's in your home. We did some research when I first got to Rewiring America about 2.5 years ago, and we tried to understand, there wasn't a lot of literature on what people knew about electrification. Only 27% of people reported knowing what electrification was, and even there, it's like, do they think it means, you know, having electricity in your home? Not so sure. So we knew understanding of electrification was low. This is super important because over the next decade and change, we need to move 124 million households to action, getting all those gas-powered machines out of their homes, by our count, about 1 billion machines. Easy, right? We have to move people from this huge awareness objective of making it more than 27% of people knowing about electrification to actually wanting to do this stuff. So what do they need to do? People are aware of climate change, but they're not aware, like I wasn't, of electrification as this huge personal lever for action. And the real takeaway for me was a framing that worked to make consumers aware of this power, because at the end of the day, even with all the beautiful money available through government incentives and rebates like the IRA, people still have to make that choice to take those 5 fossil fuel burning machines, give or take, out of their homes. People have to actively know what these machines are and about the harmful pollutants coming into their house because of them in order to make this choice. So, of course, to understand how to do all this, we need to measure and test. And that is where our lovely friends at Yale began to really help us out last year. We were, for the first time, able to include some questions in the Climate Change in the American Mind study, which is so important because it's a real benchmark for understanding of these issues. And through this research, we learned that 61% of people want an all or mostly electric home. The really interesting piece is that's largely because the number is only that low because, which is still pretty darn good. We were pretty surprised because people are still tethered to their gas stove. But as Phoebe said, this is not super surprising because we know the gas lobby has spent millions and millions, maybe billions, perpetuating this idea that gas and that blue flame is somehow better. So if we can debunk that myth, I'm really curious to see where we'll land in the coming years when we test folks to see, because we know the gas lobby works so hard to keep people hooked on gas and maintain that connection, both literally and metaphorically. To give you a sense of how deep this runs, I took this comment from a really smart person called Peanut Butter 7721, who is the highest commenter on Raleigh's Climate Town video. If you haven't seen it on methane, could not agree more. Natural gas has to have been one of the most effective branding strategies of all time. I mean, maybe I'm just saying this because I fell for it, but it sounds pretty darn good. Natural gas. We have the other example. This is just yesterday, yet another piece in The Guardian about gas lobbies, trying to get fancy chefs to cook with gas on their programs. This has been going on for something on the order of 70 to 80 years. We know the gas lobby paid Bob Hope to start saying cooking with gas so many years ago. And so this stuff runs deep, and upending these false notions about the greatness of gas is just the work of our organizations and all of you to help undo. So back to people caring about climate change and how we can leverage this. People care about climate so much. This number ticks ever upward, and thanks to Yale, we have great data on that. But it's not doing the work because people don't see their own huge power to do this stuff, and people B, as Phoebe said, don't know that know about gas in their homes to the extent that they need to push back against this 80 odd years of propaganda and money spent on gas. Most people don't see gas appliances in their homes and businesses as a place where they can help. And so at Rewiring, we really try to work on getting that message across. We have a simple framework for doing this. The I don't know, the define, people do not know, as mentioned by both Josh and Phoebe. When you survey people, they have really positive associations of natural gas and really negative ones of methane. We have to make people see that these two things are synonymous. Natural gas is comprised between 80-90% methane, and we have to do the upstream work to change the norms. Can we get public editors to, encourage their writers and editors to call it by methane gas, or as I saw someone say in the questions, fossil gas? I like methane because it's literally a gas that is made of 80-90% methane. The key thing there is to make sure we use that as an opportunity to educate. We know that we have to define the terms in the piece itself because people don't make that connection. So as long as we're saying, this is natural gas, which is actually methane, and then go on to explain it from there. Beyond that, a thing that we work really hard to do is to describe, because we know that carbon literacy through nobody's fault. We have no great labeling on our packages. It's hard to know what a megaton means. People are just busy, and this stuff is complicated, and the gases are invisible. And how do we make this real for people? even when you know that natural gas is methane, that's like a really hard thing to wrap your brain around. How do we contextualize how bad it is? I really love this from my colleague Leah Stokes. It's like a mini fossil fuel plant in your home. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And, that's what caused me to rip out my gas stove, like, oh my gosh, I'm actually like giving my son asthma by burning this gas inside my home and not turning the vent on very often because it was so noisy. What are other ways we can do it? We parallel it to things that people will also say, like, remember when we did this thing that seems so normal, like smoking while holding our children or smoking on airplanes? Like, so many of the things that we now realize are like, I can't believe we did that. Hopefully people will have those moments. And then finally, a key part of our work at Rewiring is the defrictioning. And we know right now this is hard. It's hard to understand this stuff. We have to make it easier. And we do that through tools, through education, through any means we can to help people come around to the beauty and inherent superiority of electric and induction cooking. So a little bit about audiences. It's key to make sure you pick the right frame when you're talking to anybody and trying to convince them. A couple things I'd like to highlight from some of the research we've been doing, I guess I'd say for about a year now. We're not only working to share factual information about climate and health, we are engaging on a deeply emotional level where our statements will be read as commentary on people's homes and how they care for their loved ones. Cooking with gas, the way you cook is so deeply personal that we approach it with the utmost care. For example, talking about the adverse health effects of gas stoves makes people very defensive about whether or not they are good parents. They may resist this information because it's hard to hear that you've been exposing your kids to carcinogens for decades, and there's no immediate way to resolve the situation if you can't go out and swap your stove right then. And the emotional undertones also hit really differently based not just on your home situation, but your social context. Women can be judged really harshly when it comes to caregiving, and certain communities face a lot more scrutiny and criticism about their life choices. So that's just a little bit of context. Then when we go on, I'm almost at time, so I'm going to hurry up here. We think about a whole bunch of different messaging frameworks that are often not climate. People on my team make fun of me because I keep adding C's to this slide, but there are many C's that are effective in messaging this, and climate is really the foremost one. People care about cost, they care about cleanliness. A gas stove is a dirty pain in the bum thing to clean. It's much easier to just give your induction or electric stove a wipe. So we find the frames that land most with people and try to work on those. Okay. To go quick, I'm going to say we have a couple best electric practices, 3 key ones: no judgment, show the better, and make it fun and accessible. We stay away from the bans and negativity because your home is your hearth. And as I mentioned, these are deeply emotional experiences. This is some fun creative that we produce with ACE. You can totally cook beautiful food on a walk on your induction hot plate. It's great. We show it's better. Things you might not know: induction is quieter, it's cooler, so many things. And then finally, we make it fun. Induction's got to be, we played with Stephen Colbert when he said that induction, that electric stoves were bad. We're like, he was thinking of his grandma's hot coils and not the beautiful induction new stoves of today. Okay, that's it. And we also dance with heat pumps. Now I'm going to pass it over to Sonal to say more important things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just wait for the screen share. Wonderful. Great. This has been a lot of wonderful information so far. So what I'm going to add on top of it is just an example, not strictly of a communications campaign, but sort of a bigger campaign that included a lot of important components about how we talked about, communicated induction stoves and the harm of gas stoves to our members. So I am the former policy director of We Act for environmental justice, and so I'm going to be talking about a campaign that I did with We Act just about a couple of years ago now. And We Act is a community-based organization based in Harlem, and we do directly serve the community of Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood. And in this example, we're working with a community that was a low-income community, folks living in public housing in the South Bronx in New York City. So you can go to the next slide. We work on healthy housing a lot. That is like the sort of general term for just working on how we improve people's homes. And I'd like Sarah said, which is so right on the head, is that homes are so emotional to people. It's very personal, the way that you intervene in someone's home has to be done with a lot of care and a lot of understanding and really meet people where they're at. And so that's a very important part about how you work on such a topic like burning methane gas in homes, which is what this campaign was focused on. And this is a major issue because we know childhood asthma is really high across the United States, but particularly we see it high in certain neighborhoods that have a huge accumulation of indoor and outdoor air pollutants. And we know now that burning gas in homes, particularly from your stove, but also, you know, there's sort of other ways that that sort of these respiratory triggers get to you. But burning gas in your home is a huge contributor to asthma, we know. And in a community like Harlem, in a community like the South Bronx in New York City, there are above average rates of asthma. And so that's why we wanted to focus on these communities specifically. But homes are really personal. You can go to the next slide. They're home to a lot of pollutants that we know about, but like pests, like mold, all sorts of environmental triggers. But we also know that this burning gas is a huge contributor. So people spend a lot of time in their homes, like the EPA says. It is a very important place for people to be. It's a source of security, source of safety. It can be your source of financial well-being. It's a very important place where we raise our children. So it's very important that we are addressing indoor air. But you can move to the next slide. However, we know that EPA doesn't really regulate indoor air quality. There's not really a good mechanism for making sure that people's homes are safe. Yes, there are certain laws in cities and municipalities and states around what kind of unhealthy environmental hazards can be in homes. Like you're not allowed to have a lot of pests if you're a landlord in New York City. Like that is technically illegal, although prevalent. These things we know are asthma triggers, and so there have been some laws against it, but we haven't yet seen anything come out yet, and those really at the forefront of figuring out how to create some kind of regulations around burning gas in homes. Next slide. So we know that there's a huge impact on low-income communities when it comes to using gas stoves. Yes, people across all incomes and demographics and geographies use gas stoves. I've been someone that's lived in a home with gas stove my whole life. However, we know that there's some other kind of elements outside of that can impact how it impacts your health. So small apartments, if you think about it, you know, a really small space with the gas stove, you're not going to have as much air for the combustion of gas to kind of hit you, and you might not have a vent. That's kind of common in apartments to not have adequate ventilation. You might not have a window nearby. All of these different things can be an impact. And then you also might have a lot more trouble around housing maintenance and sort of malfunctions and how you get your appliances fixed, or you might have the least efficient appliances. And then lastly, what's really common is when you're lower income, a lot of people struggle to pay their utility bills. So they have what's called energy burden, where their income of utility costs, their ratio of utility cost to income is very high. And so as a response, we know what's really common is that instead of turning on your heat source, you might just like turn on your gas stove because it's a little bit less expensive and use it as a heat source. So then you're taking on all of those several environmental hazards when you turn that on. Next slide. Actually, you can move a couple slides forward. I think we went over a lot of this with the other two presentations. You can go to the next slide. So something that's really important is that we know that when you turn on a gas stove, it only takes a few minutes for there to be some kind of impact where you see the combustion of gas leads to NOx output, NO2, which is a respiratory trigger. And it only takes a few minutes for that to actually start being taken in by people around it once you turn the stove on. We also know from the RMI study that actually when you turn a stove off, a lot of times it can continue to sort of leak methane and leak NOx and the many environmental hazards that we heard about today from Phoebe. And so we know that the gas stoves are not only a problem when you're using them, but also when you're not even using them, it can be a really big issue. Next slide. So one thing that we worked on was the Out of Gas Inlet Justice pilot project, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next slide. But we wanted to work on this issue very much from the health perspective, and this is where the communications comes in and is really important, is that we want to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at. And what we found with WEAC's work and reaching out to people in the community in these areas that are more lower income, where people already are seeing really high levels of asthma and other health issues for their children and for themselves, the health angle was the most receptive. So people felt like that was a really important reason to focus on thinking about having a different stove or making some kind of changes. And it was really helpful for us to have the diagrams like the one here from RMI, but lots of other ways of communicating how the taking in NOx and taking in other toxic gas can really impact your health. So that was really important and something that helped us kind of begin the conversations with people about participating with us. Next slide. So that takes us to the Out of Gas study. We were the first study to monitor switching a gas stove for an induction stove in low-income housing. Particularly, we did it in public housing in the Bronx. What we did was we had 10 control, 10 experimental apartments where we switched out 10 stoves, and then did a comparison of NOx as well as carbon monoxide, but really we focused on nitrogen dioxide and levels in folks' homes and saw if there was a difference. What we found was that there was a huge difference. We saw a 35% reduction in daily nitrogen dioxide concentrations when you're using an induction stove compared to gas stoves. So we know that there was a huge health benefit to switching out your stoves. But what was really important from the communications perspective is finding out from our focus groups and from conversations with the participants why they ended up all wanting to keep their stoves. So they did have the opportunity to switch their stoves back. We wanted to make sure that this was completely their choice. If they wanted their gas stove back in, we could put that back in at the end of the study. None of them chose to do that. They all chose to keep these induction stoves. And there was a lot of reasons why that I think are really helpful for understanding how best to communicate the benefits of moving away from a gas stove. And you can find this in the Out of Gas report on WEAC's website in more detail. But some of the important things were definitely the health benefit, feeling like you're not burning this nasty substance in your home and taking it in every time you cook, potentially 3 times a day for long periods of time. People really cook a lot. The other thing was safety. So many of the participants had children, and they felt a lot more safe having their young children running around, not worrying that their child is going to put their hand on on flame, because the induction stoves, when you're not using them, they actually are not hot when you put your hand there. If you move the frying pan away, you can touch the stove completely and not have an issue. And so there was a level of safety that people really liked and felt was really important. And then the other element of safety was actually we had a participant that had experienced a gas leak in their stove. And that was a really scary time for them. And they were really relieved to not have to worry about that anymore. So gas explosions, it doesn't happen every day, but it does happen. And especially when you're living in an apartment building with a lot of people in it, you might be very worried about gas leaks in your apartment building. So that was a really helpful tip. The other thing that was really helpful is that we did cooking classes. We gave information about how to use the stove. We showed people how to use it, and they saw that, okay, I can make the dishes I make every day on this stove. And we really were specific about having cooking classes that showed people, okay, you make a lot of, chicken and rice. Here's how you make chicken and rice, and really kind of meet people where they're at. So you can go to the next slide, I believe. Yeah, and so we were able to take the Out of Gas Inlet Justice project and use it to help get many, many wins across New York State. One is, 2 of them are that we were very involved in laws to kind of make new buildings that are constructed to be all electric, so they don't contain gas and gas stoves. The other thing that was a direct result of the Out of Gas project is that the Public Housing Authority in New York is now doing an induction stoves challenge where they're going to switch out 10,000 gas stoves for induction stoves across NYCHA in New York City, which is a huge win. And one of the main recommendations that came out of our project was to simply make all stoves in NYCHA buildings induction to help this population that already has high levels of asthma and chronic illness. And then there's a lot of other work going on around clean energy programs. How do we help low-income buildings actually afford the cost of sort of rewiring your home and getting an induction stove and taking out your gas boiler, for example, if you have heat with gas. And then how do we sort of have standards on our appliances and labeling so that people are also more aware of the benefits of induction stoves. So a lot of great work has come out of this, and we hope it will kind of continue to move forward, especially as lots of groups are really talking about the benefits of moving away from gas stoves as of recent. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sonal, Sarah, and Phoebe. That was really informative. We're going to now work through some of those questions. I'm looking to my colleagues at YPCCC to pass me those questions. But while we're doing that, a number of questions that came up in the question and answer were about the cost of induction stoves and heat pumps. And Sarah, Rewiring has recently put together a really amazing guide for homeowners and business owners that are thinking about going electric. Could you say a couple words about that?
Sure. And I can pop it to you if you, I guess we don't have a chat open. I'm just to one of the questions, I put a link to our calculator, which is a handy dandy way to get a sense broadly of which incentives and rebates are available in your area. Yeah, we have a guide. I would say it's highly varied depending on where you are, but the idea that electric is prohibitively expensive is like the idea that gas cooking is superior, very much a myth. Like increasingly prices are going down. I just got an induction stove. I swapped out the electric one I had, and it was, I think, $1,500, so pretty comparable to a gas stove. And it really just depends on what you're after. But the incentives and rebates in the Inflation Reduction Act are pretty compelling. You can get $840 towards an induction stove if you are a low-income household. So, I think this is all changing really quickly, and people have tethered to this idea that it's expensive. It still is far too expensive for so many people, and we have to make it affordable for everyone. But the other comment I put is there are all sorts of amazing things happening through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. We're going to work to help low-income households afford this stuff through financing mechanisms, through grants, through all sorts of assistance, because it does have to be at par or cheaper and much easier to do. I'll link to all the guides on our website, but I would like to hear what Phoebe and Sonal have to say too.
Well, I'll just add on the cooking side. I also just got an induction stove. I'm very excited about it. And it's totally a myth that cooking on gas is better. I have cooked on gas a lot, and you simply do not have the control that you have with an induction stove. You can literally dial it in. If you want to stop the boil or start the boil, one quick little adjustment makes that possible. Water boils super quickly. It is very easy to clean up, just a swipe of that ceramic top. And actually many chefs say the same thing. If you're cooking, for example, candy, and you need to dial it to the exact temperature that you need for that food, you can do that with an induction stove in a way that you absolutely never could with gas.
Phoebe, I'm gonna have to come over to your house the next time you make candy. So the top question that came up was, could you explain more about the 80 times the global warming potential? And so with that, I think Phoebe, maybe if you want to take the first stab at why we say methane pollution is 80 times that of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, so I'm a communicator, not a scientist. So I'm going to give you the sort of layperson's answer to this question. Essentially, methane has a much higher, it traps much more heat in the atmosphere than CO2, but over a shorter period. So methane degrades in the atmosphere much more quickly over about a 20-year time horizon. So that's why it's such a powerful tool. Reducing methane emissions is such a powerful tool for reducing climate change in the short term. And because we are, we're pushing up against that 1.5 degree threshold, it's critical that we actually take some of these short-term measures that are going to help us limit warming over the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, where we're going to obviously need to deal with CO2 over the long term.
The next question was one from Luke Metzger. Hi, Luke. We've met before. Given people don't know that methane gas is natural gas, should we first say natural gas so that people know what that we're talking about before we say methane gas? And I'll open this up to the panel. Any thoughts?
I'll just jump in. I think we definitely need to, in the first paragraph of any piece, just the clarifying, because otherwise we're losing that connectivity and people won't necessarily make the connection. So we recommended in very gentle letters to public editors at various publications that they should switch to methane and always caveat it with we are referring to natural gas. So people actually make that link and don't think we're talking about something else entirely.
And I'll just add that I love the scare quotes around natural and, maybe calling it so-called natural gas. It is industry branding. So we really are buying into that industry branding every time we repeat it. But of course, we need to make that connection for people. So natural works for me.
I'll also say, I've heard a lot of folks use the term fracked gas. That's like another term that's been thrown around. I don't know. I'm not the communication specialist on this panel, so I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that, but that's something I've heard other people say, and there might be some states where that feels more relevant, where that's sort of a bigger topic of conversation and might hit harder. So it also could be a little bit location dependent as well.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that one. There's some partisan differences on how people perceive these different words that are really interesting. So with fracked and fossil gas, that can actually raise favorables from methane gas compared to methane gas for Republicans. So they're feeling favorable towards fossil fuels and fracking. So it sort of improves the favorables in comparison to methane, whereas methane has sort of a universal dampening effect across partisanship. So not only is it sort of like technically more accurate to what the gas is, but it also doesn't sort of unintentionally activate one audience. That said, for sort of a left-leaning audience, fossil and fracked is effective. So it kind of depends who you're talking to.
Yeah. So next, I want to pull a question from one of the questions that was part of the Zoom registration. Based on the panel's experiences, what have you seen as effective strategies to weave in storytelling into the conversation? And this harkens back to our webinar last week, where we were talking about the power of storytelling. So I would love to hear how people have used storytelling in their communications campaigns.
Yeah, I can just say from my perspective, what I've generally gleaned from working with like community members is that people are most influenced by their neighbors. And I think that's just a general thing that people know in this type of work. If someone next to you is doing it, if someone in your world is doing it, you're more likely to also adopt that thing. And so I think that's where storytelling becomes really important, because you can say, oh, hey, this person, this was their story. This is how they got to kind of make this change. Or this, we have someone that like told us about how the knob of their gas stove flew off because they had a gas leak. And that was really scary. And telling that story is relatable to someone if that's sort of like a relatable person to them, or someone in their community, someone in their building, someone in there from, the same country, whatever, those kind of relatability points might be. And I think that helps people kind of see the potential more. Just kind of sharing facts about the benefits doesn't really pull at the heartstrings in the same way. So I do think storytelling is important for those reasons and tends to be really helpful, particularly thinking about like, how do I tell, you know, a story or an anecdote, whatever it might be, about someone that we know of or worked with in this specific experience, and so that it can relate to someone else that we're talking to. Kind of doing that translational work, it becomes really helpful.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I saw a question in the chat about influencers as well. And I just add that while people most trust, as Sonal said, friends, family, neighbors, also sort of meeting them with content that is coming from other trusted sources who are already in their network, you know, on platforms where they're consuming news can be a super powerful tool. So that was some of the early work that I did with my team at Climate Nexus. Was enlisting chefs and other influencers who love induction and had great things to say about it, who were ready to make the transition off gas, who, you know, had a built-in following and were excited to talk to their audiences about this issue and the transition.
Yeah, and I would just want to add in terms of storytelling, I thought the cooking classes that y'all did at WeAct was a really smart move. Like cooking, and that's oftentimes where we're sharing stories. The recipes and the food just invoke so many stories in our, you can tell what I care about most is food. Um, those stories are so smart and so such a smart move in terms of breaking down one of the barriers to people taking that next step. And so I hope that we'll see more organizations do this. One last question before I turn it back over to Eric to close this out. Rachel said that she loved the ad and was wondering if it had been tested amongst consumers. And here at YPCCC, we're always a big fan of testing. So, so Phoebe, do you want to talk and others? Do you want to talk a little bit about whether you test and what you test and find?
Yeah, we test all of our ads, and that Gas Leaks Project ad definitely had a positive effect on understanding of the problem here. We saw I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but multiple tens of points swing of understanding that or favorability of gas. And in particular, we saw with that ad that folks who had gas in their home moved more than folks who didn't. So we're not always able to target every single ad to only gas homes. So it was interesting to sort of see how people who already had electric were impacted versus people who had gas. And obviously those are the folks we're trying to convince. So we were glad to see that result.
Well, a huge thank you to all of the presenters. I know I learned a lot about the work that y'all are doing. There's amazing work that's happening at the local, state, national, and international levels on reducing methane pollution, on addressing that, and a variety of theories of change. With that, I'm going to turn it over. We weren't able to get to all the questions that I wanted to get to, but we need to wrap up, and so I'm going to turn it over to Eric to wrap us up.
Thank you, Joshua, for moderating the conversation, and Sonal and Sarah and Phoebe for your thoughtful insights. We will send everyone a follow-up email after this event with the recording and some of the links that were mentioned, and also with information on our next event, which is on May 22nd from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be a panel on how youth are grappling with climate change and efforts to engage them. Have a great weekend, everyone.